Now, just something to address the feelings that some have, and these are beautiful friends, different ones worshiping Jehovah for many decades, and we're only human. You know, and it's the truth, but we're only human. So one brother wrote and appreciated his sincerity, and he said, during the annual meeting of 2019, the Ramapo project was announced. And if I remember right, it was stated that the project would be complete in a few years. With recent Watchtower articles telling us that we are in the last of the last days, beautiful expression, but words are powerful. It seemed a little disappointing that this may push Armageddon off a few years. This was his sincere concern, really. And you know he's not alone. They're only human.
We're only human. It's a human thing to take all this seriously. If you were superhuman, of course, all of this would make total sense. So yes, it seems for at least a few only human Jehovah's Witnesses, things are starting to unravel, and they're rightly asking the question, how can you be committing to projects that will be completed years in the future if you're repeatedly telling your followers or Jehovah's Witnesses that we're in the last of the last days? And was it just me, viewers, or did Tony Morris seem to distance himself a little bit from this last of the last days rhetoric?
So the events unfolding around us are making clearer than ever that we're living in the final part of the last days, undoubtedly the final part of the last days, shortly before the last day of the last days.
We are in the last of the last days, beautiful expression, but words are powerful.
You know what, Tony Morris? Never mind this, words are powerful. Which is it? Are we in the last of the last days or not? Is that expression valid or not? Because whether or not words are powerful, if we're really in the last of the last days, why can't you get behind that language fully? Why would you be kind of, words are powerful when it comes to the way you personally react to that phrase? It's almost as though Tony Morris is giving us a little window into his personal skepticism. We've already learned in this talk that in the build-up to 1975, when hysteria among Jehovah's Witnesses was at its peak, and the organization was expecting Armageddon by that year, Tony Morris was driving his car with his sons Jesse and Paul in the back and saying it could go on for decades, it could go on until 2020. If that was his reaction to the 1975 hysteria, or in the aftermath of 1975, why should it be any different now? It's almost as though Tony Morris himself is a little bit detached from this idea of Armageddon being imminent, but he's dealing with this question about Ramapo, really good question. Like Tony says, I'm sure many Jehovah's Witnesses will be feeling the same way. This is a project that's slated for completion, I think, in 2026. And I've spoken on this channel about my personal views regarding this project. I think it's all about the convenience of the governing body and the convenience of Bethelites. The organization already has at its disposal everything it needs to be churning out video propaganda material to the point where I can barely keep up. They want this Ramapo project so that everything's a bit more convenient and they don't need to commute as much. But Jehovah's Witnesses are connecting the dots and saying, hang on a minute. If Armageddon is really so imminent, why the need for this? That's essentially the question. And Tony Morris is now going to give us the answer.
The governing body wants all of you to know, including those that will see it later, that we are determined to remain active and to faithfully deliver spiritual food at the right time. We are also looking beyond the last days. You're getting that message. Let me expound on that thought. Looking beyond the last days. And this is a quote from the Proclaimer's book, and I treasured it when the book came out, and a lot of work went into that publication. But there, referring to God's people, it stated, there's a lot of international construction going on at the time, too, if you were in the truth then. Quoting it now, with the help of Jehovah's Spirit, they, God's people, want to give the greatest witness possible during the time that remains before Armageddon. They are convinced that God's new world is very close at hand, and they have faith that they will survive as an organized people into the new world under the rule of God's messianic kingdom. Now, please note the rest of this quote. It is also their hope that perhaps, keyword, many of the fine facilities that they have built and dedicated to Jehovah will continue to be used after Armageddon as centers from which knowledge of the only true God can be diffused until it truly fills the earth, end quote. Beautiful thought. Right there. Still valid. So, in harmony with what the faithful slave said then, the faithful slave now says many of the projects that are being worked on now, like Ramapo and the Good News According to Jesus video series, may or perhaps will carry over into the new world to assist the great crowd with the work ahead and perhaps including resurrected ones. That's comforting. That's just, you have to let that sink in.
Oh, don't worry, Tony Morris. I'm letting it sink in. In fact, the more it sinks in, the more I think about it, the more openly silly this theology is getting. This is the answer, apparently, for Jehovah's Witnesses writing in, saying, what, 2026? For the completion of Ramapo? Oh, don't worry. We'll be using it in the paradise. We'll have, just outside the reception area, a special area where people can sit at fruit tables and frolic around with pandas. All of this is being planned in to the grounds so that we can do all of the paradisey things. After we've finished burying the bodies, there'll be all sorts of frolicking with animals going on in the grounds surrounding Ramapo, while inside Moses and Solomon and Samson and Jephthah and all of these faithful men of old will be spearheading the global dissemination of spiritual food. I ask you, how can any of this be taken seriously? How do you watch this with a straight face and think, yes, that makes total sense. Ramapo will be used in the paradise, of course. In fact, let's start building all of our paradise homes now, because apparently certain buildings can make it through Armageddon so long as they're being used by Jehovah's people. I can start building my paradise home now. It's almost on the same level of silliness and self-indulgence as the whole Beth Sarim fantasy, if you think about it, isn't it? This is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from Rutherford saying, hey, you know what? I could do with a mansion in San Diego, but don't worry, it's not for me. I'm going to deed it to Moses, David, Samson, Jephthah, etc. The ancient worthies are going to materialize in Southern California and make a beeline for this particular property because it's in the deed that it's theirs, and it will be used as a headquarters for the worldwide New World government, whatever. How is this any different? Ramapo is going to be used by the same individuals in the paradise to help run the planet, with Tony Morris and Stephen Lett and David Splane looking down in heaven, directing the whole thing. It's blatantly silly, but this is the sort of nonsense you now have to believe as a Jehovah's Witness.